Cruella is a 2021 film that isn't well liked, shall we say, and for good reasons. It certainly isn't a good film, and it does not do justice to the character of Cruella. Fans of good writing and the 101 Dalmatians franchise would certainly despise this film. There are, however, things that this film honestly does well, and I think that bears highlighting. Unlike most films that come out of Disney these days, Cruella does have artistic vision behind it, even if that vision is flawed, marred, and made almost unrecognizable by its writing. Set in 1970s London, Cruella makes very good use of its location and time period. Let's start with the cars. Cruella's car, the Panther DeVille, is iconic, rivaling James Bond's Aston Martin. Originally released in 1974, the Panther DeVille is one among the neoclassic revival in car design. Neoclassic cars evoke the style and design of those from the 1920s and the 1930s, while hiding sleek, modern, and powerful technology under the hood. The Panther DeVille specifically was modeled after the 1930s Bugatti Royale. The car is uniquely British and uniquely 70s, representing an automobile design movement from the period. The filmmaker took great pains to actually acquire an authentic 1974 Panther DeVille from a collector for a rather large price tag. The other way Cruella uses London in the 70s is through fashion. My idea of fashion is a popcorn-stained t-shirt and 6-year-old shorts. So my experience with fashion is minimal at best, so take this with a grain or a heaping helping of salt. But from my research into Cruella, the film seems to pay homage and faithfully represent a particular period of British fashion history, the punk movement. Jenny Bevan, the costume designer for Cruella, cited Vivienne Westwood as an inspiration for Cruella's clothing. Westwood is thought of as one of the architects of the glam punk movement in London in the 70s, famously designing the clothing of the Sex Pistols. Her story is also somewhat mirrored in Cruella. Cruella, like Westwood, is a self-taught fashion designer who takes aim at the entrenched fashion establishment, represented in the film by the Baroness, played by the incomparable Emma Thompson, and much like punk fashion that sought to rebel against the establishment, but was instead embraced by the establishment, Cruella dethrones and replaces the Baroness. I guess I should have said spoilers, but who cares really? The punk chic movement, or the glam punk movement, is represented by a rejection of the traditional fashion norms. Lots of leather, chains, and graffiti-like handwriting. The vintage style of clothing is represented well in Cruella, or at least well enough for me, a random dude who spent around 10 minutes looking it up on Google Images. The story is thematically tied to fashion and told in colors. The Baroness's dresses are in browns, greens, and golds, with a refined tailor style and eye-catching asymmetry. On the other hand, Cruella's clothing is in red, black, and white, with a far less refined, grungy look. The evolution of Cruella as a designer follows her character arc, as poorly written as it is anyway. But we'll get to that eventually, I swear. Her clothing changes as we go through the movie. Growing up with Horace and Jasper, her clothes are utilitarian, basic. When she gets recruited by the Baroness, she wears prim and proper clothing in order to fit in with the other designers. This part of her arc is interesting because despite the Baroness recruiting Cruella because of a punk-inspired window display, Cruella is put to work designing the same old stuff the Baroness is known for. Another example of her trying to fit in, or being made to fit in. And finally, when Cruella rebels against the Baroness and traditional fashion in general, she comes into her own, fully embracing the glam punk style. The animosity between the Baroness and Cruella is well represented in the themes and aesthetics of their clothing. That said, the plot is abysmal, and I mean truly terrible. Gone is the Cruella DeVille who rejoiced in puppy murder, smoked like a chimney, and adored furs, replaced instead with an edgy youth to whom evilness is a costume and not a description. Our very first retcon is that Cruella isn't her actual name, it's Estella. We begin the movie with some very bad parenting. We're introduced here to where Cruella comes from if it isn't her real name. Her poor mother calls her Cruella whenever she causes trouble and tells her to rein in that side of her personality. I'm just gonna call this character Estella from now on because she's nothing like the Cruella we know and love to hate. Her mother never reprimands her child for her bad behavior, and even as she's being expelled, she takes her child's side. So Estella's motivation and MacGuffin comes from the dumbest place. The Baroness's 3 Dalmatians knock her mother right off the side of a cliff. No, really, I'm serious. That actually happens. And of course, Estella shoulders the blame for this, even though it makes no sense for her to do so, believing that she had killed her mother. She believes she had killed her mother because 3 Dalmatians broke loose from their handler, chased her outside, and for some reason knocked her mother off the side of a cliff. That's really stupid, even for a kid her age, or any age really. Now, if the film decided to make her hate Dalmatians because of this event, that would make a lot more sense. It's still goofy as all hell, but just a little bit better. The MacGuffin is a necklace that her mother wore, which finds its way into the hands of the Baroness through pure chance and clumsiness. Jasper and Horace are retconned into orphans that grow up alongside Estella, committing petty crimes together to survive. They even get her a job at Liberty London, which is a real department store, so this could be clever product placement. Much better than the Ghostbusters 2016 film anyway. At her new job, she's not allowed anywhere near the clothes and instead made to scrub and clean. This is the first instance of the continuing theme of her being forced into boxes by the fashion establishment. One night, she gets drunk off her boss's alcohol and rearranges a window display. Just as she is getting fired for this transgression, the Baroness walks in and hires her for her personal couture. An hour later or an hour earlier, and Estella would have been out of a job. And just how lucky is it that she ended up working for a woman she has personal history with? After working for the Baroness for a short while, Estella notices her mother's necklace around the Baroness's neck. At this point, Cruella turns into a heist film. Estella, Jasper, and Horace plan out a whole shebang to get into the Baroness's safe. All this, and it turns out she's actually wearing the necklace. You know, the place where it was the first time Estella saw it. The heist concludes with Estella simply snatching the necklace right off the Baroness's neck and leaving. In the resulting scuffle, one of the Baroness's Dalmatians swallows the necklace after Estella drops it. Again,
it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Estella realizes now that the Baroness deliberately killed her mom by using a dog whistle to sick the Dalmatians on her. Which really shouldn't change her motivation if she was a normal thinking character. It would still be the Baroness's dogs that killed her mother, and it would still be the Baroness's negligence to keep her dogs in check that caused the death of her mother. Even if we take this whole dog whistle part of the plot out. So of course, she decides to take revenge, and what better way to take revenge than by upstaging the Baroness through fashion? Now we're on some Yu-Gi-Oh shit.
The legendary Blue Eyes White Dragon! Take flight, Blue Eyes White Dragon ride!
Around this time, Estella leans fully into the Cruella persona. She starts being a total dick to Horace and Jasper, and to everyone she knows, really. She believes this ruthless, extreme side of her gets things done and done faster, but the friction she creates with Horace and Jasper threatens to bring the whole thing crashing down around her. While this side of her is closest to what Cruella is actually like, the retcon of Horace and Jasper into equal partners and not just lackeys creates a dynamic where this persona doesn't work at all. The Cruella persona is just that, a persona. A costume to be worn and taken off when she doesn't think it useful. And I say doesn't think because it never really helps her out at all, serving only to alienate the people she cares about. The fact that it's a costume is most clearly seen when she kidnaps the Baroness's dogs and they have to wait for the necklace to come out the other end. The actual Cruella would have gutted the 3 dogs, fished the necklace out of their entrails, skinned them and made a pretty dress out of them. Estella now starts building her brand by crashing the Baroness's parties in a montage of flamboyant outfits. This was my favorite part about the movie because no one was speaking and the fashion, the real point of the movie, was on full display. The long flowing dress, including a whole garbage truck in its presentation, was the best one. It took a little anachronistic inspiration from the John Galliano newspaper dress from the year 2000, but that's the least of this film's worries. She continues working for the Baroness, sabotaging her couture from within. At one point, she makes a dress with 1,000,000 painted moth eggs, so that when the moths hatch, they destroy the Baroness's spring collection. Of course, this leads the Baroness directly to Estella since she's seen the dress Estella made, the centerpiece to her spring collection, covered in the husks of moth eggs. In fact, the film makes it a point to show a moth hatching from the dress while the Baroness is looking at it. For all this talk about Estella being a genius, this really isn't much of a smart move. Jasper confronts Estella about her Cruella persona and how it's become difficult to help her when she's rude and demanding all the time. She responds with,
Cruella gets things done. Stella does not.
except the difference between the 2 personalities isn't clear at all. Before she took on the Cruella persona, she masterminded the necklace theft and she, as Estella, sabotaged the Baroness's spring line. To me, the only difference is the unpleasantness. This would work if there was no pushback to her demands and rudeness, as it was in the previous 101 Dalmatians content. There, Cruella would verbally and physically abuse Horace and Jasper, and it worked really well, because they're hired thugs, bumbling goons, and not part of her adopted family. Now we come to the big bait and switch moment of the film. Cruella shows up at yet another Baroness fashion show in a dress that looks like it's made from Dalmatian fur.
She killed my dogs and made a coat.
Except she never really killed the dogs, and we're shown that they're alive and well in the very next scene. If they really wanted to make this character into an anti-hero, instead of just the hero, she would have killed the dogs and it would have made sense for the character, as they were instruments by which her mother died. But nah, they had to make her both rude and unlikable, as well as completely morally upright. It just doesn't work. The Baroness tracks Estella down to their hideout and retrieves her dogs, attempting to kill Estella by burning down the building. Then Estella threatens to kill the Baroness and her dogs.
I'm gonna kill you. And your dogs.
It falls flat because she had the chance, in fact, several chances to kill her dogs and do what Cruella would have really done, but she never took them. She should be dead to rights, burnt to a crisp, but in comes Mark Strong ex machina to whisk her away before she died and deliver some much needed exposition. He returns her mother's necklace to her, revealing that it hid a key. And keys usually open things. And lo and behold, he also has a box that this key opens. And wouldn't you believe it, the box contains yet more exposition. Apparently Estella is the Baroness's child and was adopted by her mother because the Baroness wanted to have her killed. And of course, Mark Strong ex machina saved her life back then as well. Estella apologizes to Horace and Jasper and they immediately get back into her purse. We are then treated to one of the weirdest scenes in the film.
Thanks for helping me.
Well, I find it very difficult to say no to you sometimes.
It's one of the things I love about you.
She loves that he's a sycophant. I suppose the OG Cruella would enjoy being sucked up to, but these shades and pretenses of being that character are jarring to see in Estella. The film ends with the Baroness pushing Estella in her red wig off the same cliff her mother died at, while partygoers watch. Estella survives, of course, because she's built a parachute into her dress, and the Baroness is carted away to jail. Who knew that fashion could be such a lifesaver? With the Estella persona well and truly killed off, she uses her handy box of exposition to take over Hellman Hall, renaming it to Hell Hall. This is rather fitting, emblematic of what Estella really is. The persona of Cruella is just a disguise, a costume to be worn, much like her dresses, but it isn't who she is inside. No, inside, she's a goody two-shoes who really doesn't do anything evil, she just pretends to. She's evil in name only. You might be wondering why I haven't mentioned Roger and Anita. Both of them are side characters that don't do much at all. Anita is a reporter for a newspaper that Estella uses to get her name into the spotlight, while Roger is a lawyer for the Baroness. Both are reduced, retconned into being lackeys, while Estella takes the spotlight, even graciously giving Pongo and Perdita to the two star-crossed lovers in the mid-credit scene. The true star of the show, and the closest parallel to Cruella herself, is Emma Thompson's Baroness. She is rich, actually ruthless, and treats her underlings like trash. She also has a keen eye for fashion. Other than the awful plot, one of my biggest gripes is how utterly wasted Mark Strong is. He's a brilliant actor, reduced to a deus ex machina and exposition for Cruella, before he fades back into the background once again. This should be classified as a war crime. The CGI in Cruella is weird. Not all the dogs featured in the film are real. Some are real and partially CGI'd, and some are entirely real, giving the film an unsettling, uncanny valley effect in some scenes. The director, Craig Gillespie, said he found it very hard to work with the real Dalmatians because of their skittish and energetic personalities. I think that's a cop-out, because both in 101 and 102 Dalmatians, all of the dogs were real and they were trained very well. I'd chalk this up to laziness. So instead, in some scenes, the dogs are half real and they're half computer generated. In close-ups, they're the real deal, but when they do complex movements, they're entirely CGI. The biggest source of Uncanny Valley to me was this scene, where the directors had the real dogs sit for the bath, but CGI'd their faces because they didn't look angry enough. These decisions caused discomfort for me when I watched the film for the first time, especially when they swapped between the real dogs and the CGI in subsequent cuts in the same scene. Cruella's score is uninspired and pulls focus from the scenes a lot more than it complements them. They're often extremely on the nose for the scene they're supposed to be complementing. For example, when Cruella takes over Hellman Hall, Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones plays. That's just comical, given that we've seen a 2-hour film that is quite literally drumming up sympathy for a woman called DeVille who skins dogs later in life. It's like the punchline for a joke. The soundtrack for the film is just someone's 70s playlist thrown in while matching scenes with the tunes that they wanted to play. The soundtrack includes 30 non-original tracks, which means we're roughly seeing another 70s hit song play every 4 minutes. It gets very tiring. Cruella is a terrible film. Its writing is awful and the characters don't ring true whatsoever to the source materials, which causes big issues in the character development. That said, I definitely think it did have artistic vision behind it, and its allegory of a very real fashion movement from the 70s was well done. I'm not sure if it would have been better as a fictionalized version of a Vivienne Westwood biopic. I doubt audiences would have been too keen on that if it wasn't dressed up in the guise of a recognizable Disney brand. I certainly would have liked it better that way. Cruella attempts at times to capture the slapstick nature of 101 and 102 Dalmatians with Glenn Close, but for all its goofy moments, it remains tonally inconsistent. Slapstick comedy doesn't lend itself well to a rather serious revenge plot, and a serious revenge plot doesn't have room for slapstick humor. In the end, Cruella is a mess of a film, written presumably by a team of monkeys on typewriters. If you're interested in an obscure fashion movement from the 70s or pretty dresses, watch the film on mute. If you value your brain cells, give this one a pass.